Good morning, 5th graders. We are going to continue the lesson on the Great Depression. If you need a review before we get started, the Great Depression was a severe worldwide economic depression in the decade following World War II. The timing of the Great Depression varied across nations, but in most countries it started in 1930 and lasted until the late 1930s or mid-1940s. It was the longest, deepest, and most widespread depression of the 20th century. The causes of the Great Depression are still being debated today. A weak banking system, overproduction of goods, overspending, and bursting credit bubble were just some of the reasons. But the Wall Street crash of 1929 was one of the main causes of the Great Depression. As news of the stock market crash spread, customers rushed to their banks to withdraw their money, causing disastrous bank runs. People who had been very wealthy lost everything they had, and some even committed suicide. Many companies went out of business, and huge numbers of people lost their jobs. At the peak of the Depression, 1 out of every 4 people were without a job. Herbert Hoover was president when the Great Depression began. People who lost their homes often lived in what were called Hoovervilles, that were named after President Herbert Hoover. There was also Hoover Stew, which was the name for food handed out to the poor at soup kitchens. Hoover blankets were newspapers that were being used to cover people like a blanket. Hoover hogs were jackrabbits that were used for food, and Hoover wagons were broken down cars that were pulled by mules. The single most important issue of the 1932 election was the Great Depression. With the unemployment rate at nearly 24%, heavy industries barely functioning, and dramatically low prices of farm products, Herbert Hoover, the incumbent Republican president, faced challenges. Although the Great Depression hit countries all around the world, Hoover was held largely responsible for the consequences of the crisis in the United States. His re-election became even more questionable when Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the successful and popular governor of New York, won the Democratic nomination. After winning the election of 1932, Franklin Delano Roosevelt promised a New Deal for America. This consisted of a series of relief programs and reforms introduced to provide federal assistance to Americans and boost the economy during the Great Depression. Most of the programs were introduced during the first term of FDR's presidency. The United States government's reaction to its entry into World War II was to institute massive deficit spending and the conscription of all able-bodied young men for the war effort, thus creating a full employment economy, which was the immediate end to the Great Depression.